What happened to Zion? I mean, he was the #1 player in the country. More than LeBron James, more than Steph Curry. He was at the top of the world. He had all the attention, all the hype, all the fame. And for good reason. I mean, the guy could do this, and 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 this.
Are you serious?
But now, what happened to him? I had to find out. So I went on a search. There had to be something behind the way that this has all been playing out. How could you go from being mentioned with names like LeBron and Curry on the regular to being out-highlighted by LaMelo Ball? Didn't make any sense. I mean, sure I do. He was built different. I mean, come on, bro. Just look at this. Oh my gosh. But his statistics haven't been down at all in the NBA. In fact, he's been putting up historical numbers. Through all my research, I only could come up with questions. Isn't Zion supposed to shine right now? Isn't he supposed to be the next face of the NBA? No. Apparently not. If we look at the amount of searches for Zion Williamson with the past 4 years, we see something quite intriguing. The very height of his career, quote-unquote, the time he was the most popular, was in February of 2019, which was of course Duke leading their way into the March Madness. From there was a spike when he got drafted, then another one when he made his season debut, but from there, he's barely being noticed. And it's not because he's playing bad basketball, ain't no way. At some 26 points per game and 7 rebounds in the past few games at 20 years old, he's an amazing basketball player. But something isn't right. And as KidComma11 does, we're going to have to see what that not right is. Like the video that didn't make sense. So in order to understand what's going on here, we're going to have to go back to the time that Zion ripped the ball out of RJ Barrett's hands. That was a crazy time, wasn't it? And very different. But as we all remember, that was when Zion made his first appearances in the NBA. All the hype was building, the pressure was being mounted, and all of it was coming to a crescendo until he tore his meniscus. Then from there, the Pelicans for the next few months had way too many nationally televised games, and Zion's extravagance was sort of forgotten about. Of course, the only reason that Zion is so popular is because of his freak among freaks athleticism. The man could dunk from the free throw line at 280-something pounds. That's a different breed. Everything that made him famous was now really coming into doubt. Well, mind you, there are obviously many doubts before about his weight and the amount of pressure he was putting on his joints and all that, but this was something very real. In his meniscus surgery, he had half of his meniscus tendon removed, meaning in at least one aspect, he had half a knee in his left leg. Not, alright, that sounds stupid, but like, you get what I mean. Now, of course, if you're taking off 3 months and you are losing half of your knee, you'd imagine for athleticism to diminish. And that's what many pundits and fans and everyone in the NBA thought. So when he finally made his debut in that fateful January day, there was a lot of praise. But the first thing out of everyone's mouth was,
athletically, he clearly was not the same. That wasn't Zion Williamson.
while he'd put on one of the most spectacular performances of the season, 22 points in 18 minutes, off of 17 straight points in the fourth quarter. I promise you that was a game to watch. There are eyeballs everywhere, including me, that figured that, you know, he's not coming back like he was. But regardless of all that, Zion wants to have a spectacular 24 games or so in the 2019-2020 season. Enough to almost make him a serious candidate for Rookie of the Year if Ja Morant hadn't been Ja Morant. But then, of course, as we all know, the pandemic hit. I believe that's where the Zion hype really hit its new low. Of course, there are so many other topics to talk about in the NBA that Zion was sort of at the bottom of the list. Now, mind you, the Pelicans were receiving hype yet again with Zion and Ingram and Lonzo as becoming dark horse candidates for that 8th seed and making a spectacular matchup between LeBron James and Zion Williamson in the playoffs. That would have been box office television right there. But for personal reasons, Zion had to take 2 weeks off before getting back into the bubble, and of the 8 seeding games, he only played 5 of them and looked even less athletic than before. While his athleticism had waned, Zion fans had believed with the 4 months off extra, he'd be able to come back bouncier and better and more like his college self than before. But he proved the very opposite. Now, this isn't an indication of what you should be looking at in order to determine athleticism, but in those 5 games that he did play, he had 7 dunks, and while that sounds sort of standard for him, if you look at the actual dunks, they're not very Zion-like. So as we know, the Pelicans were eliminated from the bubble, and from there, we haven't really heard much about Zion. And recently, actually, I decided to do a little bit of a test. Now, Bleacher Report's probably the best place that you can find the pulse on the relative hype of an NBA player. Like for LeBron, of course, he's LeBron, so he's going to be posted a lot. Since August of 2020, which is basically the end of the finals, all the way up to now, I tallied up Zion's posts compared to LaMelo Ball's and LeBron James's. And what I found was not surprising at all. We have LeBron with like 50 highlights posts or something like that. And for LaMelo, he wasn't actually far off. He was at 40 highlight posts, which,
Oh, that pass.
And then we get to Zion. He had 19. Now this is a far cry from the hype that he'd received in just 1 year before, and it's a pretty good indicator of where his hype level is at. One of the major reasons for this, naturally, is that LeBron James is LeBron James, LaMelo Ball is a media personality. Zion Williamson is neither of those. While LaMelo himself isn't a media personality, his whole upbringing, the feeling that we've sort of grown up with him, and of course LeVar, is what draws so much attention to him. For Zion, he doesn't have any type of media relatability besides, his actual play. You've never seen anything crazy about Zion, nothing interesting off the court or anything like that, except for like a lawsuit that probably a lot of you haven't heard of, and when he was drafted, when he said something along the lines of "Let's dance."
Let's dance.
But outside of that, we haven't seen anything, if much, of Zion at all that's going to make him more appealing. I'd liken it to Patrick Mahomes, but the thing is, Patrick Mahomes is out there playing, and he's playing at an elite level. So he can afford to not necessarily have a media personality. But for Zion, even though he's playing amazing, the New Orleans Pelicans are not the Kansas City Chiefs. For starters, they have not been good for a long time. The most that they got was the second round with Anthony Davis, after having him for roughly 7 or 8 years. And of course, we all know that New Orleans is not necessarily a basketball city. Now, imagine that the Pelicans somehow dropped to 4th and the Lakers got to 1st. And through some crazy form of events, Zion ended up on the Lakers. It doesn't matter if AD doesn't go, it doesn't matter if LeBron leaves. If Zion is playing with the exact same caliber that he is playing with right now in New Orleans, he's getting a lot more media attention. Now that he's on New Orleans, tough luck. One of the reasons that Zion Williamson was such a phenomenon when he played for Duke was because he played for Duke, the most famous college basketball program in the world. Combine that with his raw talent and insane athleticism and highlight plays and the quality of that roster, then you get the most popular 18-year-old in America. Now he plays for the New Orleans Pelicans, and of course, their name falls a lot flatter than Duke men's basketball. Now, all of these problems would not be problems at all if just one tiny little thing were different. The New Orleans Pelicans were actually good. If they were good, we wouldn't have to worry about any of these problems about his hype or whatever like that, because the media follows winning teams, but only if they have a superstar. And when I mean superstar, I mean like LeBron James and Stephen Curry. But unfortunately, the Pelicans are not good at all. They're like 6-11. And have been completely and utterly, totally sold by Coach Stan Van Gundy. He's been a merchant. He was hired by the Pelicans to give him that winning edge, and it hasn't worked one bit. The New Orleans Pelicans, with Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, and Zion Williamson, are one of the slowest teams in the league. Compared to last year where they were in the top 5, now Stan Van Gundy doesn't want the team to run. And as we all know, that's what Lonzo Ball does best, and what Zion is pretty good at. Now that's something you could look over if they didn't have so many problems with threes. The Pelicans are dead last in 3-point buckets allowed. They don't know how to defend the 3-point line. If they're able to fire back, that'd be okay, but they're not. JJ Redick, the team's best shooter, is hitting roughly 32% from the line. Lonzo Ball is hitting 29%, and everyone else isn't much better. Add that with the fact that Steven Adams cannot shoot beyond 5 feet, and then you've got a huge problem for their offense. And speaking of offense, Zion Williamson's highlights aren't as high anymore. As we talked about before, the athleticism declining was a huge factor in the hype sort of subsiding for him. While he dunks almost twice more a game than he did in college, most of them aren't very impressive. It's gotten to the point where if Zion has one great dunk, you're gonna see it 7 different times on the same post.
Zion goes.
It's clear that the NBA still wants to market Zion as one of the next big things, but with his dunks not being as amazing as they were before, it's harder for them to do that, which is tough for the NBA given that they're really desperate for him to do something good. The NBA actually got so down bad that they started posting Zion layups. is different, bro. Come on, man. But that's part of him maturing into a fundamental NBA player. While right now his numbers are amazing, he's still really not that great at basketball. If you look at any of his highlights, he's not got a really tight dribble. He can't shoot for anything. He can't fade away enough. He doesn't have anything but his body, which of course is one of one. But yeah, in the end, this all goes down to team construction. If you got a bad team, or more like a bad system in a small market, that spells disaster for 99.99999% of people in the league. Maybe if you're good, they can post stuff and get away with it, but for Zion, that's something very hard to do given that he had such high peaks, to the point where almost anything shared now is almost insignificant. It's sort of like you're becoming underwhelmed because you're already used to the things that he's able to do. And when he's not doing those things anymore in order to become more of a solid NBA player, he becomes sort of boring. If he doesn't do this anymore, or this, or any of things like that, well then what's the hype about? What happens to those LeBron comparisons? These are things that he's basically been bred since high school to produce. Ever since we saw him at 16 years old, we've expected him to be this non-stop highlight machine. But with the pros, with the risks that are involved with his health, he has to look for a different path. No more dunking from the free throw line at 280. But at the same time, what he has is what he has. He is 20 years old in the greatest basketball league in the world, and excelling. While he might not be the Zion from Duke, he's the Zion of the New Orleans Pelicans, and what he's done so far is super impressive. So let's take his greatness for right now and appreciate it for what it is. So hopefully, one day, he's gonna return the favor. Thanks for watching.